And now I request Geeta ji to moderate the program.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saxena, and thanks for bringing this book out during a very difficult time. As a fellow publisher, I know the challenges and even keeping the industry going. So thank you very much for that. And welcome everybody to this evening's program. And this is the book. Some of you may have it. I just wanted you to look at the cover, which is really very striking. Very briefly, before I hand over the mic to the panelists, I want to sort of say a few words about the book, because willy-nilly I found myself involved in thinking about it when Ranjana and Nigam were working on the manuscript. For those of us who have not had a chance to read it yet, the book is it's titled Resisting Dispossession, the Odisha Story. And it's actually a fascinating walk through India's history of political economy, so to speak, because it starts from the heyday of planning, which is the 1950s, with the Hirakud Dam project, and it brings us up to speed till the anti-POSCO agitations in Odisha. So basically, we see how the post-independent economic and political scenario unfolded in one part of India, and we also see the sort of different moments through which this journey had to pass from the commanding heights, so to speak, of the Nehruvian state, through a stage where we had all these sort of promises of private partnerships, the kind of agreements that the government of India got into with private players, to the present moment, which is the neoliberal moment, so basically. So this is really a walk through India's political economy, and it's very traumatic as well as telling history of dispossession. The struggles that are recounted in this book give you a sense of what the Indian state considered to be its priorities, irrespective of what the citizens of India might have considered their priorities. So the struggles that are recounted here are against big dams, Hirakud and Rengali, against the missile site in Valiapal, and these large steel plants that and bauxite mines that were sort of planned for from the 50s and 60s, but many of which came to fruition in the 80s and afterwards. And of course, being Odisha having a long coastline and something we understand very well from Tamil Nadu, the onset of aquaculture, especially prawn farming in the Chilika lake area. So basically, you have in this book an indexing of all the major so-called development projects that have had their various avatars across the country. And in that sense, it's also a kind of history in miniature of the vision of development that the Indian state and increasingly the governments in the regional level have been invested in. So that's by way of what the book is sort of looking at. But I must say, as a reader, when you my first sense of after having read the book was I felt extremely humbled for various reasons. One is by the very quiet tenor of these struggles. There's nothing flashy. There's nothing that's sort of ideologically resonant or potent in the way those who are part of these struggles speak about them. But they speak them from within extremely everyday and lived experiences in terms of loss, in terms of what it means to them to lose a coconut, to have a cow go back to the village from which they were displaced, what it means to sort of lose that many acres of land, and over a long period of time, what does that translate into? So you have a very granular and a very lived sense of dispossession. And that's, I think, very moving, because often, and especially currently, we are living in a situation where everything is sort of crunched into numbers and statistics. So to actually have a sense of what it is that is there beyond these numbers. So if 269 villages were displaced, what does that mean really? And to hear the voices of people from the time of the Hirakud project down to POSCO, it's an extremely humbling experience. So that at one level, I think is very, it's an extremely moving thing to be reading. And secondly, as Ranjana and Nigam state in the introduction, India's rulers in the past and present seem to have had very low expectations of Odisha, so to speak, that this is a benighted part of the country, and that, you know, this is something that one has to sort of then uplift and build up and so on. And the struggles recounted here, as well as the voices of the people, belie any such sort of understanding of the region. And I think you see a saga of resistance which is strong and which speaks to us over and above the various ideological positions that are staked out in these struggles. And one other thing is, none of this is, of course, idyllic. And that's also something the book calls attention to, because people are saying this from within lives which are very difficult to lead, where hunger haunts you for part of the year, where it's not easy to find work to feed large families, and a society which is also riven. There's caste, there's class, and there are differences between Adivasis and others. So it's also a fairly riven society, but from within each of these contexts, what happens when dispossession stalks the entire landscape, so to speak. So between what happens within communities and in terms of what happens to the village as such, or to the region as such, you have a sense of the kinds of struggles that are waged on an everyday basis, as well as during these moments when various kinds of demonic projects are brought into the region. And the term resistance also unpacks very differently in the book, because I think it's not a resistance that ends at some point. And every moment of stalling something that has been extremely destructive also is a moment of waiting for the next round of destruction. And this is something also that you see from over the years. And so the time in between one moment of struggle and another moment when the struggle ought to continue, that intermediate period is what you're left with. But it's a period also of hope. It's not only of menace and of what we could expect, but also that people recall from the past and hope to struggle in the present. But having said that, the book also makes it very clear that what you're up against, or what people have been up against over the last decade or more, starting from the, let's say, if you want to put a date to the neoliberal onset from the late 90s, the nature of the powers that they have to confront is also changed substantially. There's greater violence, there's a greater presence of the state in the form of the police and the paramilitary. There's also much more in evidence the kinds of very collusive relationship between capital and the state. So there is a qualitative difference in the nature of state power, which is also very evident in the way the narrative moves. Because in the first part of the book, you will see that there's a very different quality in terms of how people view their lives. And as you move into the neoliberal regime, there's another sort of thing that they have to fight for. Not simply what they're about to lose, but fight to retain their sense of themselves as justice seeking people. And as several people in the book point out, what this model of so-called development has done, it has sort of also completely intervened in the way we relate to each other as human beings, and how it has created from within blocks that would take the company's side, that would sort of be collusive with the interests of the Tatas or the Birlas or whoever it is that's setting up these companies. And there's a lot of sorrow and tension around it. And I'm sure Bela here can tell us more about it, since in Chhattisgarh we've seen an entire vigilante movement that was developed by the Indian state. The other thing that also you see is that towards the end of the book, when you come towards the end, I was reminded actually very oddly of the Communist Manifesto, and that one line which says all that is solid melts into air. Because what has really happened to these long-standing traditions of fighting and staying within the landscape, and how that's sort of shattered by the power of big capital in a very frightening kind of way. And perhaps a very long history of relating to one's environment is being sort of overlaid by this menace, by barbed wire, by what the authors call the boundary wall that's not retreating, boundary wall around these steel plants that's not retreating but eating into the landscape. So for me, it was such a moment from another longer history of extraction and primitive accumulation that was again unfolding here. So I'll just end with saying some things about the way this book has been written, because I think a lot of the feelings that you're left with when you finish reading the book has to do with how it narrates these struggles. I think one of the, for me at least, was very, very fascinating to see how they've written this with an eye to detail, like almost a novel. The characters that throng these pages are people whose stories you want to know more and more. So there's a novelist's eye for detail here. And also there's a very refreshing absence of rhetoric or polemic. And as people speak and as they frame the views that they present with an ironic aside, with a gesture towards a critique, you see what they're criticizing. You don't need a larger ideological framework to get a sense of that. And that I found very refreshing. And I also found what was interesting was the way the voices of the people that have been part of these struggles are amplified by quotations from literature, by things from world cinema, from voices from different contexts across the world, particularly from Native American voices from the United States, from Mexico. And I think those amplified the meaning of these struggles for me in very rich ways. It's done in a very integral kind of way. It doesn't seem forced. It doesn't seem like we are sort of drawing parallels in a very large kind of way, but in a way that was very integral to how these voices may be understood, these voices in resistance. Let me just end by saying that all too often when we narrate struggles or when we speak of campaigns, very, very rarely do writers establish this distinction between those institutions or parties or movements that coordinate such struggles and of people in movement. And I think this is a book about people in movement rather than about organizations or parties. And that for me is also such an important aspect of how we read these struggles. So these are just by way of a very brief prefatory remarks. But I'm actually now going to hand the mic over to Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, who of course needs no introduction at all, especially to an audience in Odisha and elsewhere in India. But I just very briefly introduce him. A very well-known political scientist and civil and democratic rights activist, China scholar. He's also written widely on social movements, consistently paid attention to issues to do with gender and caste in his understanding of political change. And he's also been very interested in exploring the idea of a creative society, which I think we are in dire need of now than at any other period in our history. What does it mean to be politically creative? So thank you very much for joining us, Professor Mohanty.
Thank you. Actually, this is a momentous occasion to celebrate this extraordinary book by two extraordinary writers. I think Ranjana and Nigam, they are social activists, but intellectuals who had adequate training up to a certain point, but then engaged in understanding movements, participating in movements, and writing about them. So I really feel privileged to speak about this. This is extraordinary, really, as a contribution, as Gita pointed out. It has so many important aspects that should draw attention of scholars particularly, but also activists and policymakers. As you said, it narrates the voices of people from movements. But I would say that the narrative is always put in some perspective, all the chapters and the introduction. These are people who know about the world and about history and about the debates on development and history of colonialism, capitalism. So it's narrative. It's what social scientists would call primary material right there from people's voices. You don't have to aggregate it as the social scientist does. You take the primary material. The other extraordinary thing is that the voice is not diluted. Of course, it is mediated through English language, but even that, as the introduction puts it, and throughout the book, they really use the local idiom, local slogans so well that you maintain the authenticity of the voices. I think this is a book chronicling, narrating the authentic voices of people in movements. Another extraordinary thing is that from what is known to be a so-called backward state and so on, from the cliche of rich country, poor people, I think they construct the history of struggles which are part of a global tradition, struggles that generate hope. In fact, this is the India story, that struggle for democratic rights is what gives us hope, despite all the setbacks. But the struggles are going on. And same in Odisha. So this is an extraordinary book in many, many ways. I will be very biased because I have been personally involved in all the movements except Hirakud probably, but even 2 years ago when I see Sandeep here and some others, Sandeep Patnaik, we were conducting public hearings on displacement in Koraput, then Rourkela, then Jharsuguda, then Keonjhar, and so on. And the Hirakud displaced people came to Rourkela as well as Jharsuguda, even now. So the Budi Anchola Loke, they are still this Budi Anchola Loke, that means the people of the drowned areas, they are still fighting for their rights. And so I'll be a little biased because I'm a not sympathizer, participant in most of these movements. As a PUDR fact-finding member, I have been part of so many fact-finding teams in many of these movements. And also I am fond of both these extraordinary writers and activists based in Odisha and who have made the intellectual and the discursive climate in Odisha quite significantly different. Now, I will begin with something that Geeta referred to, the creative society. I think this is the story of emergence of creative society in India and in Odisha. This is part of that history of creative society and struggle for creative society, which means that the feeling that the realization that all human beings have creative potential, all regions have creative potential, and the constraints of class, caste, colonialism, patriarchy, and so on have suppressed that creativity. Therefore, the struggles are trying to expose the contradictions, bring the latent contradictions into the open, and trying to handle them and pursue these struggles to realize those creative potentiality. And all these struggles are part of that history of creative society. And they are still going on. 3 or 4 of them can be considered to have failed in achieving their immediate targets. But it has changed the world discourse on development, on transformation. Same way, Kalinganagar, may have been suppressed, or Kashipur alumina plant may have come up, but they shaped the discourse and development in Odisha. And this is captured centrally in all the narratives. They reassert their history and not their subsistence. In fact, in the introduction and the epilogue and throughout, the term subsistence appears very often. I would substitute that with the living life. So this story is that of contradiction between living life, which is live, which had gone on for centuries and which is still alive, and that is confronting capital. And all the narratives about the Mali, that is the hills, or the fish, or the betel vines, or they are part of the living life, the actually living life confronting capital. And in many cases they won. In many cases, apparently they failed, but they have won in making their message as a part of this continuing historical struggle. As a political science researcher, I'll shift between my civil liberty role and a Odisha researcher and a social science teacher. Right now, I was fascinated by the methodology applied, and they explained it so well by listing the interviewees, beginning and the end, and the narratives. So that's why I said this is a wealth of primary sources. And unlike the interviews in voting survey or market survey, these are interviews which capture the authenticity of the voices. And at the same time, the central question is very clear, which is that they had the ownership or possession of natural resources, not necessarily as property in the capitalist sense, but as a collective possession, a collective wealth. The whole concept of kotha in Odia, or the connection between the community and the dongar, the hills, the publicness of this relationship with the natural wealth and the humans. So the problematic is very clear: the opposition, the resistance, the challenge, a fundamental challenge to that colonial appropriation of people's resources, people's wealth, natural wealth particularly. And therefore, the methodology and the problematic are extremely important for researchers, and this is why it is an extraordinarily important contribution to social science literature on social movements globally. Now, the very important question that we must ask is, what has been the justification by the rulers, by capital as well as the state? It was national interest, building a new nation building, and they put it very well. They chronicle it very well, particularly in the case of both Hirakud Dam and Rengali. By the way, you are right, Rengali Dam, Austi's movement for their rights is less chronicled and even less known. In fact, I came across more of them in some of our meetings in Sambalpur in various other research projects, and also in the Raurkela study. So national interest. But in neoliberal context, the justification is growth and this vision of achieving high growth. And also for high growth, the myth is being created that it will trickle down and everybody will benefit. And the Odisha story belies that. In fact, this is the story in the world against neoliberal capitalist development. The whole world has to note this story, and in India particularly, and in Odisha. Odisha is the play of that colonial capital story as well as the neoliberal growth story. And whatever pretense the earlier chief ministers in Odisha had of reconciling, dam or Paradip port and so on with poverty eradication, that has been given up in the neoliberal phase between J.B. Patnaik and now Naveen Patnaik, last 20 years. It is very clearly, and they put it very well in this book, you export minerals, import machinery is required for those industries which are based on minerals. So that circuit is the circuit which they say will help reduce poverty in Odisha. And the migrant labor story in the wake of COVID lockdown made it again very, very clear for the whole country. In Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, so many places. And we were studying the Odisha story, and that made it very clear that extractive capitalist strategy has been the bane. And as a result, Kalahandi continued, not only Kalahandi, all of Odisha. Of course, Western Odisha, Southwestern Odisha are poor and very poor, but poverty exists in all parts of Odisha. So that becomes very clear after the neoliberal reform started. This extractive capitalist strategy is in full swing in operation, and it is justified by coercion and manipulation, both. So a bought over media and coercion, and as they put it, whenever they find resistance has become very sharp, very aggressive, they call it a Maoist takeover or something. Maoist, in fact, Visthapan Virodhi Janamanch in Kalingaraga is characterized as a Maoist front. Even Niyamgiri Suraksha Samiti was banned as a Maoist front. Fortunately, the ban was lifted by the court. And Niyamgiri Suraksha Samiti is still very, very active, as you all know. And the Gram Sabha victory was responsible for stopping that mining project. As Gita said, the read is like a novel reading. I mean, it's wonderful. We have all written on some of these movements or the other, but never like this. This should be the first reading I will recommend on Odisha history of Indian political economy history, actually, from the Odisha vantage point. Because the stories are, they are really stories. Hirakud chapter is called Disease of Gigantism. And the whole story is about the big dance. Rengali, what the king gave happily, my God. Joy Gandhamardhan was the slogan. I was part of the civil liberty group, PUDR team there. Baliapal, the conch and the missile. In fact, the Vitamati concept emerged from Baliapal. And I will come to how I have used that term to conceptualize what I call the right to earth. In fact, that is the message, the alternative message of the Odisha story, the Narmada Bachao Andolan story, and the global people's movement story is how people are asserting their right to earth, their right to protect the earth and its resources on the basis of their skills and knowledge, and particularly men and women. And that is a wonderful discussion throughout the book, the women's participation, but also betrayal of women by the leadership very often. So the conch and the missile, those of us who visited Baliapal in those days have witnessed that. The Chilika Tire, this is a famous kabya of Radhanath. And this is the prawn project of the Tata. The Gopalpur Tata skill, the Kia in range. That wonderful, the Kia flower, the scent is made out of the fragrance. Kashipur, the song of the Mali. Mali is the Pahad, the hill. So the calling of the hill. I remember 2 or 3 films, particularly the film by Subrata Das, Subrat Sahu, sorry. Juhar Niyam Raja, the Niyamgiri story, we are all part of that. We are still singing some of those songs. Kalinganagar, the taste of steel. Posco, the beetle smiles. The beetle vine smiles. I was absolutely bowled over by the titles. I always value the titles a lot of the chapters. And so the poetry and the voice, and it is picked up from the people's voices. And some of the slogans, Ga Chhadibu Nahi, Jami Chhadibu Nahi, some of our Odisha meetings, we begin with Ajit Panigrahi, and recently another young man has come up to sing. They sing this song and we begin our meetings. Anyway, now 2 issues I will speak about and end. One is, what has been the impact of these movements? I'm afraid the impact has to make us humble for a different reason. That the political parties have learned very little from these movements. It has been so frustrating. All the political parties sometimes would arrive to support, particularly the opposition parties of the time. And then they would co-opt some of the leaders. And the movement people at large, really feel betrayed. So, and why has it happened? Why has it not impacted India's political movements or Odisha's party movement? And in fact, the extractive capitalist strategy has become the dominant politics, and as they put it, all the political parties of Odisha subscribe to that. That is the consensus. I think for 2 reasons. One reason they mention very well in most of these movements, the upper caste, patriarchal leadership, male leadership very often made compromises. That's one reason. Another reason is they all remained single project movements confined to one area. And there were many attempts to bring the movements together, like in the NAPM framework, but it has not succeeded. I remember in POSCO, several occasions, all the other movement people came to POSCO, but so that has not happened. But I think more serious explanation is that a combination of repression and manipulation and co-option, I think, has succeeded in selling the dominant development strategy and maintaining the state. And I think, you brand them as Maoists, you arrest them, all kinds of repression, and media is bought over and manipulated. And then some crumbs are given now and then. So that is one reason. The second question that I would like to stress is the positive and permanent contribution of all these movements. That is a fundamental critique of colonial development paradigm. I'm not one of those who dismisses the development concept. I don't allow the capitalist development strategy to monopolize what development is all about. Yes, they would say the Vikas, but there is a people's development, people's concept of development. And I think we shall not allow development to be appropriated by the capitalists. This is not development, this is destruction, this is vinas. And I think the single most important contribution of these movements is the right to earth. I think the right to protect our resources of the area and share it with the world, with others, on mutually agreed terms and not on the monopolist terms. Right to earth is the new fundamental right, which is based on mutuality between humans. It takes into account, class, caste, gender, ethnicity, sexual preference, and the most important thing is between nature and humans. And that balance and mutuality is the central principle. And sharing with others on mutually agreed terms, not imposition. And this is why these struggles are so important. And I'm so glad that they have moved the discourse from displacement to dispossession and resistance to dispossession, not just chronicling dispossession, chronicling resistance to dispossession. And that is the sign of hope for the future. Thank you very much.